So if we were to say what kind of a society developed in the Tidewater region, we would say, well, it was very similar to the medieval society in Europe. It was aristocratic, it was stratified, and it was agrarian. Now we're going to look at New England. And what I want you guys to remember, we talked about Henry VIII starting the English Reformation. He really didn't change the church very much. That was different from the Reformation that was happening on the continent of Europe. On the continent of Europe, the Reformation is about doctrinal changes in the church, and they formed new churches that were doctrinally different or actually reformed from the Catholic Church. And some of the aspects of these churches were that position of the church in salvation wasn't thought of the same way. In the Catholic Church, you can't get salvation without the sacraments, and you have to get the sacraments from the church. But in the Protestant religion, the church basically was just an assembly of believers, and they got their salvation directly from God. And that salvation, they got the faith for that salvation from being able to read the Bible. And that's why they were able to read the Bible. And so there were basically two different types. There were many, many, many different types, right? But the two main types that we're talking about here were the Lutherans and the Calvinists. The Calvinists were a little bit more, I guess you could say, radical than the Lutherans, because Lutherans were actually a little bit closer to the original Catholic Church. But Calvinism actually becomes popular in England, even though it's illegal, because everybody in England is supposed to be Catholic before Henry VIII and Anglican after that. But after Henry VIII broke away from the Catholic Church, even though he really didn't change the church, there were some people in England who thought this is going to be a good opportunity to purify the church from within. What does that mean? Purify the church from within means to make it Calvinist, essentially. And in England and Scotland, they would call it Presbyterian. The point here, though, is that there's this group of people who work with Henry VIII and with the fact that he broke away from Catholicism in order to try to implement these reforms in the church or to purify the church from within. And these people are called Puritans. Now, here's the thing. By the time we get to Elizabeth and James, these Puritans are going to realize that they're not going to be able to purify the church from within. And so they basically move to Holland, and they practice their form of religion there. Holland is a much more tolerant society than England at that time. And while they're there, they ask for a charter from the king to find a place in America where they can practice their religion freely. And they actually do get a charter from the king, and he allows an expedition to go to America that basically is going to form a new colony in America. And the people who are forming this new colony are coming to America with the idea that they're going to found a model Christian society. They come with the idea that they're going to build what John Winthrop is going to call a city on a hill. Now, a city on a hill is a Bible symbol, a model of perfection. A city on a hill is a place where everybody lives in peace and harmony with God and with each other. So when the people came to New England, their motivation was much different from the motivation of the people who settled Virginia. Why? What was different?
The original settlers were there for economic reasons.
Exactly. They went there to get rich. They were going to get 100 English gentlemen to conquer the great Indian Empire, and they were going to extract value just like the Spanish had done in New Spain. The problem, of course, with that was there was no great Indian Empire. But nevertheless, the whole project was about making money. But in New England, the project is about what? Establish a city on a hill, which is a model Christian society. So in that sense, we would say that the colonization of New England was started by a missionary impulse. these Christians were on a mission to fulfill the New Testament idea of the city of God on earth. Their idea was that they were going to found this model Christian society that proved to be so prosperous and so blessed that everybody in the world would want to live like them. And then they would voluntarily adopt this Christian attitude that would give them this blessing of living in harmony with God. It was really very much like the idea of, I mean, if you know biblical history, the idea was that the Jews were going to establish this holy city in what today is Israel, and they would create such a blessed society because they followed God's law that everybody in the world would come back to being subjects of God. So that really never happened. It didn't happen because there was corruption in the church. And now these Puritans are saying, yeah, there's corruption in the church again, and we're going to do what they couldn't do. So we're essentially the new Israel. That's their idea. When they went to America, their charter was for land in this area, but they didn't make it there. They sailed off course, and instead they ended up in what will become New England at a place called Plymouth, which is here. So it's way off course. So this is where they end up landing in 1620. You guys ever heard of a pilgrimage? A pilgrimage is when you make a journey to go someplace holy, right? Like, for example, Islamic people have to make a pilgrimage to Mecca once in their lifetime. It's called the Hajj. So a pilgrimage is a religious journey or a mission, kind of a missionary journey. So that means that the people that came to America on the Mayflower were called pilgrims. Basically, then what happens is they land in Plymouth, and then later, 10 years later, there's going to be another group that comes and lands in what becomes Boston. So they're basically, the two ships are the one of the Mayflower, of the original settlers, and the Massachusetts Bay Colony, what came from the ship Arbella, and it was led by a guy named John Winthrop. Okay, and here's the quote by John Winthrop: "For we must consider that we shall be a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword through the world." So you can see on that, in that quote, the idea, or the missionary idea that they had, that they were there to build this model Christian society.